This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander. As always, I'm joined by the Score's lead betting analyst, Mr. Matt Russell. I got to say, the vibes are still high. After 2 weeks, finished off week 2, 11, 4-1, bringing the season total to 22, 9-1 against the spread. Start the season. I hope kids get along for the ride with us here because we're riding high still. Mr. Matt Russell, how are you feeling after 2 weeks of this NFL season?
Great. Week 2, a lot better on the bank account than week 1. Week 1, I sort of kind of stumbled around to small profit, whereas week 2, we really got things cooking. But I'm going to interject here because you'll never say it, because part of it is kind of going behind the curtain, if you will, on podcast recordings and all that sort of thing. But it is worth mentioning that you're grading your record on the picks that you give out. But this podcast came out Thursday morning last week. Right, which it does frequently. For those who don't sort of realize the magic of podcasting, we record this on Wednesday afternoon. So when we give out the Philadelphia -6.5, for example, if somebody's listening to the podcast and they go, "Oh, Shell's on -6.5," they go to their sports book. There are no -6.5s to be found. There are only -6s and even some -5.5s, depending on at what point during the day. So if they're actually following you and making bets based on the podcast, that record is actually 12-3-2, or sorry, I should say 11-3-2, or 12-3-1. So you're actually undercutting yourself from a sort of true betting standpoint, which you kind of have to do because we're on the podcast and you and I were both sort of on the Eagles. But yeah, there was some much better numbers available that people who listen to this podcast, by the time they listen to this podcast, would have gotten a winner on Thursday night. So don't sell yourself even, as much as we're sort of doing a victory lap, don't sell yourself short.
Well, here's the thing, right? I always stand by the real ones know. So the real ones who will listen to the pod and they're following along and they know one thing we'll get to for sure. Yeah, that Eagles game was crazy. I think when we recorded the pod last week, it was actually Eagles -7. Right. And so the way that moves by the time the game starts and it's -6, well, obviously we're going to be on that -6. Now, that game was insane. And we'll get there when we get to, because I'll tie it into the pick for this Thursday night's game. But the lesson here is that what we try to do here is more about the conversation. Yes, I have the record. Yes, I have the bets. But the key is about the conversation and understanding what said line movement is, because the Packers will be another game that we'll talk about because we'll reference what last week's line was when we talked on the pod and then the line movement that happened leading up to that game. And, I'm an honest gentleman. So I put up the line and keep the pick as what it was, as we discussed on the pod. And then the game happens. We'll discuss that. Real ones know. We keep the record here as, kind of a gauge to keep the wave moving. And yeah, so far, so good, I guess, as the kids say. Or do the kids say that? Or is that just something that I just said?
I said it as when I was a kid, but that was so long ago that probably not something anybody says anymore.
So for the people that might be new to exactly what we do here, we're talking about picks. I will make a pick for each and every game. I'll at least let you know where I'm leaning. I'll try to be, upfront about I'm really confident in this game or don't feel too good about it. But the bottom line is I'll make a pick. Matt then comes in with the information and education on where the line was, where it is, and where it could be going heading into kickoff. And the goal, as I keep saying, is to come out on the other side, at least with the more informed pick. I try to play the role of the viewer where I get to ask Matt some questions. Matt gets to convince me. And sometimes I listen foolishly. Sometimes I don't. And that's the show, right? As mentioned, yes. 11-5 start in week 1, 11-4-1 in week 2. We'll definitely try to keep this wave moving as we start, as always, on Thursday Night Football. Giants at the Niners. Niners laying 10 points. I'm going to be honest here, and I'm going to remove my bias here as a Niners fan, okay? Trust me when I say that. Okay. I mentioned earlier already that I'm going to compare this to last week's game on Thursday night where you had a really good home team laying a lot of points at home, and we know how that game ended, right? We'll talk about it for sure, but the Eagles should have covered that game fairly easily. Why not go for 2 at some point? I don't know, but story for another day. Bottom line is the Niners on Thursday night, short week, but Saquon's banged up. Don't know if Saquon's going to play, but chances are probably not. He matters more than most running backs, I would say. But on top of that, even with Saquon, I'm going to be honest here. Niners defense is a problem. That'll be a problem for Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones on the road, that will also be a problem for the Giants against that Niners defense that continues to just, put in work. My guy Brock Purdy, though, most important than not. I keep saying it. He just has to take care and share that rock. Everything will be all right for the Niners offense, as they pretty much should have covered 10 points last week, which is another funny cover, which I'm sure we'll get to at another point. But either way, 10 points is a lot. It's a lot. But I'm okay with taking a good team at home, laying a lot of points on a Thursday night against a team that I don't think is that good. If I thought the Giants were decent, I thought the Giants were okay on a short week, I might be more tempted to take the points. But I'm not there with the Giants at all. So give me the Niners laying 10. It's a lot.
Yeah, I think if anybody thought the Giants were decent, this line would be a lot shorter, right? Like, isn't that that's kind of the point?
But I mean, where the bet's going, where you're laying the money.
No, I understand that. So a couple of things here. So one, the line here itself, right? It crept out to 10.5. And that was having seen Saquon Barkley's injury and just going, it wasn't quite Nick Chubb level, but it was pretty like, oh God, like that, I don't know what's going on with the leg underneath that pile of humanity, but it can't be good. And then they're sort of like carrying him off the field. I'm with you. I can't imagine them playing him. And so the line's 10.5, and then Brian Daboll comes out and he's like, we're not ruling him out. People heal in like different ways and like all of that sort of thing. And like my leg would do this and your leg would do that. And it's like, yeah, man. Or if you have a brain in your head, you sit like you're one of your franchise, type players here, right? I know he's a running back, but still, your point is well taken as far as like how relatively important he is. So I think what's going to happen here is he's going to get ruled out. Probably, again, by the time you listen to this, maybe he already has been. And I think the line is going to pop back up to 10.5 and may even go to 11. And I think at that point, that's when you bet the Giants. Because this Giants team is that team who is going to be really annoying. And what happened over the first, 3 halves of the season where they're down 60-0 is they go in, cumulatively, of course. Yeah. They go into halftime, and Brian Daboll has also denied. He's just on one this week. He's also denied that he was calling plays. Now, Brian Daboll made his chops, if you will, calling offensive plays. Buffalo, Alabama, et cetera, et cetera. And when your offense hasn't scored through 6 quarters, you're probably, given that it's your sort of bread and butter, you're probably going to be like, you know what? Screw this, man. Like, I'm calling the plays. Now, you're also not going to throw your offensive coordinator under the bus, because what is he left to do if you're the guy calling the plays, right? That's a pretty significant downgrade. But cameras caught him looking a lot like a guy who was calling plays. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And so when you get down 60-0 over the first 6 quarters of your season, it's fair to say that things are not working. And so what they did instead was you know what? The last possible thing that we can do here, the last thing on our, break if there's a fire, we got to break for the alarm, is throw the ball a ton with Daniel Jones. But the thing is, before the season started, there was a lot of murmurs out of the Giants, sort of camp and preseason that they were going to be a throw the ball a lot more, get things a little bit more wide open for Daniel Jones to use his legs. He had 50 plus yards running the football in the second half of that game, but he also threw for 250 yards in the second half of that game against the Cardinals. Yeah. And so I kind of like the Giants better as, obviously with the big number, when they have to go into this game kind of knowing that they need to just say, screw it, we're going to throw the football a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
I know what you're saying.
Because if Barkley's in, even if he's 100% healthy, this injury never happened. If he's in, they spend 2 or 3 drives just running the ball into the 49ers line, right? And it was just like that. And then they realize, oh, that's not going to work. But by the time they get to that 4th or 5th possession, might be too late, right? 49ers are already up 2 touchdowns, 17 points, something along those lines. Basically like how every other, the other 2 games have gone this season. So I kind of hope Barkley goes, is ruled out. Everybody goes, no, I don't want anything to do with Giants. The line goes 10.5, 11, maybe even higher than that. And then it's Giants throwing the ball and testing themselves, deep threat, Jalen Hyatt, Darren Waller starting to kind of get it cooking a little bit last week against a 49ers secondary that I think you'll agree has always kind of been their weakest part. Now that might turn into a situation like the Cowboys where the Cowboys are just teeing off. But if you can get, if you can start throwing the ball early when you don't have to throw the ball, then it's harder for the defense to sort of tee off, right? When you have to, because you're down 2 or 3 scores, well, then the defense is not worried at all about the run game. And now maybe the 49ers will just not be worried about the run game. They'll be able to tee off. But at least when you're sort of at a 0-0 score, you can kind of pretend like you're going to run the football. And so I think it's actually better off for bettors if Barkley doesn't play in this game, the line goes up. And now we're looking at something like, honestly, a lot like last week, which is, what happened with the 49ers after they blew out the Steelers in week 1 is that their rating, you talk about ratings, right, all the time. And we had them sort of before the season. It was like, man, are they a mid-60s team, like late 60s team? Well, after they beat the Steelers, like I had to shoot them up to a 75 out of 100. And that's not my personal rating, though my rating has them. I really haven't changed my rating all that much because I had them a little bit higher to start the season than the market did. And now I have them just a tiny bit lower. But what that means is when they shoot up to a higher rating than they probably should, it means the point spread against the Rams is 8 instead of 6.5, or is 7.5 instead of 6.5. Or then, I think it might have closed at the last second at 7, but it was widely available at over a touchdown. And so as we talk about all the time, when those key numbers are kind of just sitting there vulnerable and you're getting that key number for that type of backdoor situation. Now you can say, like, listen, the 49ers should have covered, blah, blah, blah. I would make the case that the Rams had a touchdown lead. I believe it was in the second half, 17-10.
Oh yeah.
And it looked like all the world, like the Rams certainly had that cover wrapped up, right? So it's like, what snapshot are we taking during the game where you sort of assign one team the more, most likely sort of chance to cover? And so I just look at this and I go, okay, if we can get 10.5, we can get 11, and this game's a 17-point game late. And we knowing that the Giants, even having just won that game in comeback fashion, they're going to keep throwing. They're going to keep trying because they are that annoying team that's going to keep doing that.
Well, so, to your point, even against Dallas, right? They were getting blown, and Daniel Jones was still out there down, 40-0. He was still there till the very end, and they're still dropping back, throwing. He was trying, wasn't successful, but to your point,
right. And so maybe this not successful is sort of Daboll not calling the plays, and successful becomes Daboll calling the plays. And so, that'll be sort of interesting to see, anytime a camera goes on Daboll, especially obviously on offense, is he, calling into Daniel Jones, got the, the play sheet up, et cetera, right? Because that'll tell you whether you can rely, in game on the Giants. So, I certainly think it's a wait and see here. At 10.5, you take the Giants. 11, you take the Giants, or maybe even you wait and go live in this game and sort of just to see whether the Giants are having the plays called by Daboll, and if they happen to get down, field goal early, touchdown early, and this line gets up through like a 14.5 type of situation, I think that's going to be a really good opportunity to live bet the Giants as well.
All right. I like it. And I'm laying the 10 points here, and I'll emphasize the value of what Matt just said, the value of a number like 10, right? It's giving you that extra protection there of the backdoor cover that could just easily be there for a Giants team that, as we just said, very spicy down the stretch.
And again, if it's a 17-point game and the Giants are driving, right? Like, this isn't even a scenario where it's like, oh, if they score a touchdown, they'll be within one score. Like, what do the 49ers care if this game goes, if they get it to 10 with like a minute and a half left, right? That's still a 2-score game. So wait and see. Take the Giants, bigger number than this.
I gotcha. We keep things moving here with the Broncos at the Dolphins. Dolphins at home, laying 6.5 points. We're getting up there. This is a lot of points, and this will kind of be a theme throughout this pod because I'm nervously laying a lot of points this week, and more points than normal. I don't really like it, but we're here. And the Broncos are not very good, right? Russ, we could be watching the final days of Russ here, and he's been struggling. It was a weird game, a weird comeback last week, but it doesn't overshadow just a lot of the problems that they've had, especially in the second half. Offense doesn't look that bad in the first half, but for whatever reason, second half, they continue to struggle. And that was against the Commanders. I don't think the Commanders' offense is anywhere near the Dolphins' offense. And the Dolphins at home, the Dolphins, I mean, they showed me a lot against the Patriots' solid defense that Belichick's trying to scheme and make them do something different than they normally do. You know, you're going to bracket over Tyreek and make you go underneath. And it worked, right? They did it worked for the Dolphins is what I mean. The Dolphins, you know, like they stopped the deep ball, but the Dolphins were able to figure out, okay, we can go underneath, we can run the ball with Mostert, we can figure things out, and they got the win. Was it pretty? No, but it showed me that they can win kind of ugly, if that makes sense. I don't know if you got to win ugly against the Broncos because the Broncos are going to be ugly on their own. Give me the 6.5 points. It's a lot of points, but again, I'm using the key number here of 7. And if you're giving me less than 7, I will take that with the Dolphins over a not so good Broncos team led by your man's Russell Wilson.
And it's a little worrisome that you are getting the key number on the side of the Dolphins, right? Because it's not like people are shy on betting the Dolphins, I don't think, at this point, because, you know, obviously, as you mentioned, you kind of see all the exciting players and, you know, the quick strike offense and the speed. And so it is a little bit interesting, but that's what the power ratings from, you know, the point spreads of last week sort of come out to. And I'm kind of going against myself in a little bit here because I do have the Broncos sort of rated lower than the market does. And that's why I've been against the Broncos in weeks 1 and week 2. And that has worked out incredibly successfully. The Dolphins, you know, I like the Dolphins. We've talked obviously about positions on Tua and Tyreek at the start of the season.
Correct.
I just kind of worry a little bit about this line and this game, and that it hasn't necessarily, like you said, it's been the second halves offensively for the Broncos, because when you're watching them, especially when you're going against them, you do sort of still feel a little bit scared because, like, Javonte Williams, in theory, they can run the football. They have had some quick strikes here on offense as well, and it's been the defense that's kind of certainly not even kind of, the defense has let them down to the start of this season. But it's like they do seem to have a defense, at least from a talent standpoint, that is capable, right? Patrick Surtain, corner, you know, high-level cornerback. If Jalen Waddle, who I believe is still in concussion protocol again as of this recording, you know, what if he can't go? And then all of a sudden it becomes, all right, we don't have to worry about 2 guys, we only have to worry about 1 guy, and like that makes a pretty significant difference.
Huge.
And normally I would be like, well, Miami in September, they have this home field advantage. It's going to be super hot, you know, yada, yada, yada. But the Dolphins haven't been playing in Miami. They have been playing in, you know, indoors and on the East Coast at night against New England. So I'm not even necessarily sure how, you know, trained they are for it. They would have had sort of a better training, if you will, if this was a week 1 game. But instead, because they've been on the road in these really comfortable places, they don't have that sort of element. Whereas the Broncos, not obviously playing in the heat, they have obviously been playing their first 2 games at home at, you know, elevation. So, okay, heat, elevation, like obviously those 2 things are different, but at least when you go from elevation to sea level, like in theory, your wind should be even better. And so I don't think there's going to be that usual like Dolphins week 1, week 2 home field advantage, which sucks for the Dolphins. Listen, they ended up winning both those games in week 1 and week 2. So like they're fine from like a, you know, a schedule standpoint, right? A record standpoint. And so I just kind of go like, yeah, like maybe I'm not quite ready to give up on the sort of the Sean Payton, Russell Wilson thing. Maybe I'm ready for Wilson to go away, and then I want to back the Broncos, like when that happens.
Yeah.
But with 2 losses here, this does feel a little like cliche, back against the wall, an 0-2 team going on the road, putting all the like kind of crap from the first 2 games behind them. And like, by the way, like they also don't need to win the game. They just need to cover. And so this isn't about the Broncos laying 3.5 points. the way that they did against the Raiders and the Commanders, where it was just like, what? You want me to give over a field goal with a Broncos team that I don't know whether they're good enough yet for that sort of thing? So obviously I didn't want to do that. But when we're talking about the NFL and like 6.5 points being a lot of points, that's where I kind of land, where I kind of think this is going to be a little bit closer than this line sort of thinks. And I think a lot of people are going to be piling in here on the Dolphins. And it just seems like a line that could easily have been 7. It hasn't been 7 basically all week, right? And maybe that's because of Waddle's uncertainty. And maybe if he gets ruled in, it goes up to 7. So I haven't made this bet yet because I want to know whether that is a situation that I can get involved in, if I can get a +7. So it's another one, game 2 that we've talked about here, but it's another one where like, let's wait and see if we can get +7 and then bet that +7. But I also think the Broncos kind of have a chance to win this game on the money line because again, I think the offense, there's enough there where at least from a, skill possession, weapons, all that kind of, all that stuff, I think that the Dolphins can be vulnerable here against the Broncos offense. It's just waiting for the Broncos defense to kind of start coming through here the way that everybody kind of expects. And again, the fact that we're getting points here with, I'm not going to say these two teams are more evenly matched than we think, because I think the line is about right. Yeah. But I just think that, this is sort of a Broncos best foot forward type of a game where the Dolphins can feel pretty good about having 1-2 games on the road and, would be totally content with winning a game by a field goal or by 6 points.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough for me, and you almost have me here switching, but it's just at this point, I need to see it. I need to see just a full game from the Broncos before I'm sitting there comfortably on a Sunday being like, okay, I'm rooting for you down the stretch here. Right? Like I feel like they used up so much of their magic last week with their Hail Mary. And then I know they didn't get the call on the 2-point conversion, but it's just like, yeah, I think Russ has got to go before I'm ready to back the Broncos in any form or fashion. But we'll see how things go for sure. We'll see how things go for sure because it'll be super interesting. And trust me, there'll be a lot of time here on this pod for you to talk me out of laying points. I'll just use that.
We're up to 16.5 points laid through 2 games on the pod so far.
And we're on to game number 3. We got the Falcons and the Lions.
Oh, no.
And if you see this slide here, we're at the Falcons at Detroit. Detroit laying 3.5 points at home. The hook. I know the lesson here is about the hook. Okay. And I really dislike the fact that it's 3.5. I definitely want it to be 3. And I'm leaning here on the Lions. And my biggest problem here is that the Falcons, I can't buy the Falcons here. I just can't do it. The Falcons were super lucky last week to win. And hey, you are what your record says you are. I get all that, but they shouldn't have won that game against a beat up Green Bay team. And they're barely able to pull that out. Now, the Lions blew a game of their own last week, a game that they should have won, and they allowed Geno to come back and win. And I know there's some questionable calls late, but bottom line, shouldn't have been in that position if you're the Lions either. I don't like this pick at all, but I'm laying the 3.5 points with the Detroit Lions. I know I probably shouldn't be. I'm assuming because I feel like I know you well enough by this point. You're going to try to talk me out of this. But it's a tough one, man. I just can't with the Falcons. The Falcons not buying it. The Falcons coming out of this with a 2-1 record. That's a dub for them, right?
It's funny how the brain works, right? Where like you've just laid 2 points in 2 games, and so you automatically go to this game and you go like, oh, I can't keep laying these points. Whereas like I'm taking the points in the first 2 games that we had, and so now I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with taking a favorite here because I'm, already, and then none of those things matter as far as pick is concerned, right? But just psychologically, you're going
and like these games are randomly,
it's
not in order for any particular order either, right? It's just the nature of how, decide to talk about the games.
So, but to be clear, I bet the Lions at -3. That was available earlier this week. I guess because of the injury report that or sort of the expectation of an injury report that would be not so great for the Lions because they got banged up in that game against the Seahawks, right? Obviously, we saw the David Montgomery injury. They played that game without Taylor Decker. There's a couple of defensive injuries as well. I think C.J. Gardner-Johnson, one of those guys who's potentially out. But yeah, it didn't. I believe also a defensive end or linebacker as well. So it kind of looks bad because this number from like a market rating standpoint, the number that we would kind of expect it to be would be 4.5. And that's where, oddly enough, that's where I had it going into our conversation about the Lions Seahawks game last week. At the time it was 6. I said, 4.5 is my line, and it ended up closing 4.5. So does this thing go do the opposite where it goes, last week it went from 4.5 up to 6, back down to 4.5. Is this going to go from, sort of my number of 4.5, open around 3, and then go back up to 4.5? If that's the case, then obviously minus 3.5 is a good bet if we get a little closing line value with this number potentially going up to 4 or 4.5. Fundamentally, though, on the field type stuff here, yeah, I mean, Falcons full value for winning those 2 games. I think, we're going to, if we haven't already, we're going to figure out just how bad the Carolina Panthers are here in the next few weeks. Like, they could be the worst team in the league. So I just kind of go, all right, well, cool on the Falcons winning that game last week. That was obviously a bummer for me because like I said, I like the Packers more than I do the Falcons this season. While I didn't necessarily have a bet on it, I've been sort of fading the Falcons from a season-long perspective and was in on the Packers. That being said, the Packers were super banged up in that game, right? They were missing a bunch of guys, Bakhtiari, Aaron Jones, and of course, Christian Watson. And so now they go from 2 home games against, beat up Packers team and a pretty bad Panthers team to a road game against what I think we still think is a pretty good team, though, again, and Dan Campbell referenced this after the game as far as sort of like a, kind of a gut check, if you will, or sort of, knocking them down a peg type of thing after beating the Chiefs, right? I think you and I talked about even week 1 when we were betting on the Lions, we were like, okay, but we're not going to let this game, when the Lions win this game, we're not going to let this affect how we think of the Lions. And I think it affected how the Lions think of the Lions. And so I think that's kind of what happened last week. Yeah. So Dan Campbell is the type of guy that I think he's going to be a guy that we want to be backing off of a loss because he's going to have that team focused in the same way like a Mike Tomlin or some of these other kind of like, cheerleader type coaches here that get, more out of a team via motivation than
the football guy coach.
Yeah, the old football guy coach, right? Grind him into the dirt, et cetera, et cetera. So was happy to get -3 when it was available. Now it's -3.5. And guess what? I like it a little bit less, but I think it's certainly not something that I'm going to talk you out of because I think Desmond Ridder absolutely stinks. One thing to look for that I will be writing about on Saturday that I wrote about last Saturday is the Bijan Robinson over 2.5 receptions. If the market keeps doing that and giving us that option to take him over 2.5 receptions, we are going to keep doing it, though we are going to keep it a secret just between me and you so that this doesn't get out of hand. Though, who knows, maybe the cat's out of the bag and it's up to 3.5 or 4.5, something along those lines. We'll have to see. But yeah, that to me is the best bet in this entire game. Bijan Robinson over 2.5 receptions if it's back available again this week.
I like it. I got to say, I feel a lot more confident now of at least this instance of me laying points. Detroit Lions -3.5. Hopefully, let's go Lions. Switching gears to the Chargers at the Vikings. This is a pick'em game, which is fair because 2 crappy looking 0-2 teams to start the season. But I don't really think that both of these teams are really that crappy, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? I think there's there's something there, just off to slow starts, didn't look good at all. So there's potential for one of these teams to figure out what, we like to call we're going to throw everything here, right? Everything we got back against the wall. We need a win here. We need to feel good here. And if I'm picking one of these teams to do so, I could be wrong about this because I know the Vikings traditionally are a good home team. I'm taking the Chargers. Yep. And the reason I'm taking the Chargers because I just think they are a better team. I think that they've had a tougher first 2 games. They kind of went Charger at the end of both of those games where it's just an interesting, that end of the 4 o'clocks. They're running around trying to cover or blowing a cover. That's what happens to the Chargers. We saw that first 2 games. We're not dealing with points here. We're just dealing with let's win. Mm-hmm. And in that instance, at some point, Justin Herbert and that offense has to figure it out. And I think that they do this week against the Vikings. Give me the Chargers in a pick'em game.
Yeah, absolutely. No notes. The Chargers are so much better than the Vikings, right? Like losing an overtime game in Tennessee where you had the lead the entire way. Like, yes, that's very Chargery, but like that's also not the worst loss of all time. And losing to the Dolphins in a game where you had the lead pretty much the whole game, and the Dolphins scored a touchdown late with less than a minute to go. Like that's basically an overtime type of a game. Right. Whereas the Vikings were down 20 points to the Eagles, and the Eagles had basically no secondary. And like, we knew that the Eagles didn't have a secondary, and we still didn't really think to be all that worried about Kirk Cousins and the Vikings pulling that off, which is why we had the Eagles in Survivor last week. And by the way, then they also lose a home game for this vaunted home field advantage that the Vikings allegedly have. They lost a home game to Baker Mayfield in week 1, right? So like these two teams are just not the same. And, I get like, okay, it has to be a pick 'em in theory or sort of close to it. What I don't really understand is like, there seems to be at least a little bit of money coming towards Minnesota because the line was kind of leaning like a half point to the Chargers. Now it's kind of leaning to a half point to the Vikings, where you can get the Chargers at plus money on the money line. I don't understand that whatsoever. Maybe it's sort of a bad, report with regards to Austin Eckler potentially being, not back this weekend. But I don't know that matters all that much here. I think these two teams are going to throw it around the yard on each other. But I think the Chargers are just so much better than the Vikings. It's not so much like about the Vikings home field advantage. It's more like, listen, the Chargers don't have a home field advantage when they play at home. Like, right. So like when you don't have a home field advantage and you play at home, you kind of get more accustomed to being on the road because you're sitting there in week 1 and there are more Dolphins fans in the crowd. And like, so how is that any different than going on the road and being in a dome against Minnesota, right? Because they blow that horn in between, like, on third down. Like, okay, cool. Like, I think the Chargers are, again, I said no notes, and then I gave a bunch of notes about how I agree with you. Chargers here, so much better than the Vikings. They will be one of my 5 circa million selections this week. I can tell you that.
Let's go Chargers. Let's go Chargers. We'll go to the Patriots, who are laying 2.5 points in New York against the Jets. This one's tough. I'm begging for 3 points here because I want to take the Jets as home dogs. I feel that the Patriots offense, watching them against the Dolphins, they lack playmakers. They lack play calling, is very ugly. The Jets, you could say a lot of the same things for the Jets, but I feel like this will be a low scoring defensive game. And in that instance, I will take the points.
Yeah, I was with you as far as like, 3 would be good. There was some sort of juiced up plus 3s available early on in the week. And then I've started to drift away from that because A, the Jets never beat the Patriots. B, Zach Wilson was so bad. He is so bad, just bad. Belichick against Zach Wilson, yada, yada, yada. And then you go like, Patriots were in games driving to tie the game or take the lead against the Eagles and the Dolphins. Those are pretty good teams, man. And like the Patriots might be actually a pretty good team. They might just be sort of getting beat with their fatal flaw right now, which I think is the offensive line. A part of that is like injury related stuff, right? And they're slowly getting a little bit healthier on that side. We'll see over the course of the rest of the week, whether how many of their guys they can necessarily get back, because it seems whenever you blitz the Patriots, it's just over. Like Mac Jones just is getting sacked. Like there's no kind of picking it up or, hot route read or make them, pay for the blitz. It just sort of like that is the end of any sort of conversation about an offensive drive whenever you blitz Mac Jones. I think they got to at some point be able to take advantage of that. And they had the kid who fumbled, who sort of looks like Tyreek Hill in a Patriots jersey. Yeah. I think he needs to be more involved in these sorts of like blitz, hot read type screenplay type deals. But it's a matter of recognizing it from the offensive side. Thing is, I don't know that the Jets are necessarily going to blitz all that much because the Jets believe defensively that they can do it enough just rushing 4, which might be sort of true kind of fundamentally when you have a offense that can score a little bit where, like you said, it's probably going to be a low scoring game. I think the total reflects that. And so that's all well and good if your plan is to only give up 13 points. They have to be able to score 13 points too. And I don't know that they can do this, because I don't think you're going to get a Garrett Wilson 70-yard touchdown to be the one score that you get offensively, right? And so I then just kind of go like, yeah, you know what? This is probably Patriots showing us that they're probably a better team than we think, because they've played the Eagles and the Dolphins in the first 2 weeks. And I don't think they necessarily care about the, I don't know if there's a ton of home field advantage here for the Jets against the Patriots specifically, because it's not a big travel spot. It's not like they're not used to playing there. And fundamentally, I don't know that I can bet on Zach Wilson at less than a touchdown. So I like the Patriots here.
I'm going to say this much. Talking me into betting against Zach Wilson, not that hard. Talking me into betting on Bill Belichick, also not that hard. But I'm going to ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Should I feel more comfortable? I'm going to switch the pick, but should I feel more comfortable because it is 2.5, giving me the wiggle room of Patriots kicking a field goal to win the game and cover the 3 points?
Yeah. Oh, of course. That's the thing, right? Like, if it was 3, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we need to be betting the Patriots, to win by more than 3 points, right? Mm-hmm. Like this, because it's 2.5 for whatever reason. I shouldn't say whatever reason that it is 2.5, right? Because I always preach, like, listen, if you don't know how the point spread was built, like, you're probably lost. The problem here with the Jets is that because of the sort of undefinable rating of the Jets with Zach Wilson that we talked about last week, where it was like, all right, how bad could the Jets be, right? And I gave you, we did our fun little game there where you guessed sort of what the rating should be of the Jets. And it's like, having watched that game, kind of feels like we were high on the Jets, maybe just high period, but like we were too high on the Jets, going like, yeah, like, oh, 40, whatever. Like, I still think they're decent. It's like, man, they might be in the 30s with Zach Wilson. And again, no fault of the defense, et cetera, et cetera. They might be way worse than we thought. And so when you look at this point spread, you kind of have to play around with it a little bit more, right? Where you go, okay, how far are we going to drop the Jets to get this number? And you don't really have to drop them all that much further, even though like their play, kind of looks like they could be that much further.
All right. So I'm with you. The pick has been switched. New England -2.5. It kind of just fits with the narrative of this. If I'm going to switch, the first switch is going to be me laying points on a week that I'm worried about laying points. Let's go. I like that. I like that theme so far. But again, I'm making a joke because all of these games are not all related to one another. I'm making a joke for the kids listening at home. Move on to the next game. We got the Saints at the Packers. Packers at home laying 2 points. This one, I feel like I really do need you to talk me out of this because it's laying points with the Packers. I need the injury update on the Packers. I really need to know where they're at injury-wise because there was a lot of injury news that drastically switched that line before kickoff. And if I'm talking about the Packers in last week, the line when we talked about the Packers and Falcons last week was Packers -2. When it got to game time, the line was Falcons -3.
Yeah.
And so I would still have bid on the Packers. You look up, the Packers lose by 1. That's an L on my record. But again, as we discuss, this is why you listen. It's more about the conversation than it is what like the record is, right? The conversation is more important. So can you first off explain the injuries and just how that line moved from all the way across from Packers -2 to Falcons -3. And now we sit here with Packers -2. What's the injury update?
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see here as, Wednesday, Thursday, we get, Wednesday injury reports are kind of useless, but Thursday and Friday injury reports, I think, are going to be key. But this line is suggesting that things are going to be a lot better, right? And so we saw Aaron Jones miss with a hamstring, right? That's, you talk me into that being a 1 week off type of a deal. He gets back, home, by the way, right? Like, so we have a very, handful of scenarios here where we have a team that's played in 2 road games going home. So you could tell me that he's healthy. Christian Watson practiced in a limited fashion at the end of the week last week. So, it would sort of make sense a full week later that he would be good to go. And we'll see, with regards to David Bakhtiari. But sort of more relevantly with that, and I don't know, maybe, again, there is this, like, I don't want to say weird because they've won 2 games already, but there is this faction of the, like, betting, cognoscenti out there that like love the Falcons before the season starts, still loves the Falcons because again, they're 2-0. Like they haven't been sort of talked off of that ledge, if you will, with regards to the Falcons. And so maybe part of that on Sunday was just people betting the Falcons for the sake of betting the Falcons. And it didn't have as much to do with the injury report, because maybe the injury report took it from, Packers being favored to Falcons being favored, but the stretch going all the way to 3 was people betting the Falcons. Now, if you bet the Falcons from -1.5 to 2 to 2.5, you lost last week because that game landed on 1, and the Packers, were largely dominating that game. So if the Packers rating, which, we drop sort of after the fact because of where the number closed, right? So number closes 3. We drop the Packers rating to like 44 out of 100, using that number to create a point spread for this game. And we get Saints by 1. But that's not the issue, right? The issue is like, okay, are those guys going to be back, right? And so if those guys are back, then we get sort of closer to where my rating is, which is my rating's, kind of high on the Packers because I think the Packers are good. And by the way, nothing from Monday night tells me that the Saints are particularly good. And maybe that's being bitter because they backdoor pushed on, what should have been an easy cover. But isn't that the point of Dennis Allen and Derek Carr's general existence, to never sort of be able to cover like those numbers, even if you have the much better team?
Derek Carr is the worst. I'll just say that. Just interject there. Derek Carr. Yeah. You're wondering if it was just the Raiders stench. No, Derek Carr is just Derek Carr.
Yeah. And so I go, okay, well, like, what is your, what's my rating personally on the Packers, and what do I sort of think of them, especially within the range of outcomes to where they would play this game? So meaning like Saints back-to-back road games, short week, where is their range going to be? And so if their general rating is an average team, called 51 out of 100, their average, their range should be somewhere between 40 and 60. Do I think this game is going to have the Saints play a particularly good game where for 1 week they are closer to 60? Or do I think for 1 week they're going to be closer to 40? I think the latter a little bit, right? And the same goes for the Packers, because we've seen them being rated in the low 40s because of those injuries. But I kind of think their best effort, if you will, could have them, closer into the high 50s. And I think that's what you're going to get from them this week. And so when you put those two together, I get closer to 3 on the Packers here. So I already, we've talked about this since before the season. Down on the Saints, high on the Packers. Didn't necessarily work out, obviously. Well, I mean, it technically worked out in that they covered the spread after, the final spread or whatever. But like, they didn't end up winning that game against Atlanta. I still thought they played pretty well. They just, a couple of 3-and-outs at the end. Yeah, I think anything under 3 here is good when it comes to the Packers, because I'm expecting sort of big things, if you will, from the Packers with their first home game this season against the Saints team that I don't love all that much, and are on a short week and a second straight road game.
Yeah, and with this opportunity, as we're talking about the Packers game here, I want to take that time to also emphasize just the importance of, okay, here's the line. We're showing you the line. I'm mentioning the line. But the more important thing here is the conversation we're having about both of those teams, because you can still use that information for when you go to make your pick on Sunday. You're one of those people listening late and you're trying to scramble on Sunday morning, trying to figure it out. You listen to the conversation and you can understand. And if you woke up on Sunday and you're like, wait, Packers +3, you're probably jumping on that, right? I know I was. So that's the interesting part of listening to the conversation, understanding where the line is at the moment, but understanding what it means or where it could be going.
And it's really easy to say, it's more about the conversation if your record is like 8-20 to start the season. You know what I mean? But like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's not about the record. It's about the conversation. It's like, well, you guys lose every game. But in this case, it's like, yeah, actually we win a lot of the games too, but we're trying to focus here on the process versus the result, right? Because they're not always going to be, 11-4-1 weekends.
Yeah, it's about.
I hope they are.
Well, yes, we want the record to be good, but one of the themes that you talk about all the time is what was the right side, right? And like that overall is the more efficient way of figuring out if you're doing well or not, right? What was the right side and were you on the right side? So we'll keep it moving with what do we got here? Colts and Ravens. I got control room was messing me up here. Colts and Ravens. Ravens at home laying 8 points, which is a lot of points. Not going to lie to you at all here, but I really, really like what we've seen from Lamar and the offense of the Ravens so far. I know Odell went down, but Zay Flowers looks like he's real. Mark Andrews is back, picked up right where he left off with the chemistry he has with Lamar Jackson, and they can always run the ball. No matter who's in their backfield, they figure out how to run the ball. I just like how that offense is looking. I cannot say the same for the Colts. Anthony Richardson, I mean, if he was the playmaker on their offense, he's in concussion protocol as of when we're recording this pod, so that could change. That could mean Gardner Minshew. But if it's Gardner Minshew, then you got to rely on their receiving playmakers, which you've been telling us from the get-go, not so much. They got not that much they got out there, right? So here, again, it's 8 points. I don't want to lay all these points, but I also don't want to bet on the Colts. So I'm laying the points with the Ravens here. I'm trusting their offense. I'm kind of riding the wave that the Ravens and their offense is on right now. And hey, I'll do that here.
I'll put it this way. I have zero interest whatsoever in picking a side on this game, and I'll tell you why. We're gonna have the Ravens this week in Survivor, and you're gonna look at some of the other point spreads, and you're gonna be like, man, what Chiefs, like they're double digits, and Cowboys are double digits, and the Jaguars are double digits, and what about this team? What about that team? And I'm going to be a lot more comfortable with it if Anthony Richardson is out, because I'm not super comfortable with it from like a confidence in the Ravens are going to win the game as some sort of lock type situation, which listen, the NFL, there's no such thing as a lock as far as even a straight up win is concerned. But like when you're playing Survivor, like you're really hoping to just kind of like feel really, really good about it, about your matchup. The Colts with like a healthy Richardson running around and doing stuff, like they could be scrappy here. Mm-hmm. My numbers kind of come out to like, well, okay, let's play this game, right? Like the Ravens, I have bumped them up. And when you start playing around with your own ratings, right, as far as deciding which, whether a team should go up or down or whatever. And this is week 3, so it's not like you're going that far back, but especially later on in the season. But for week 1 and week 2, I go, okay, if I change my ratings around on the Ravens, what would the point spread be in previous games, right? So the point spread for their first week game against the Houston Texans would be -12. Okay. Oh, they would cover that number. They did cover that number, right? They covered a 9, right? But they also covered 12 if it were 12. Last week, my ratings for the Ravens would kind of come out to about a 2.5 point favorite for the Bengals, right? Okay. The line was 3.5. Ravens covered by winning that outright, right? So I'm headed in the correct direction. Whereas if I was listen, I bet the Ravens in both those instances. But if I had rated the Ravens this way the whole season, which I didn't have to, because as long as I'm in the correct direction where I'm betting on the Ravens, I don't have to make them an 85 out of 100. Like 67 will do. Like that's going to lead me to these bets. So as I sort of creep out with that rating that provided those 2 point spreads that I just mentioned would come out to 8.5 for the Ravens here, which means the market is kind of trailing me, like kind of right behind. Now, is me saying this is an 8.5 and the number being 8, like some great deal where like, yup, got to bet the Ravens here because I'm getting a half point between 8.5?
Yeah.
Like, no, right? Like this isn't 7 versus 6.5. This isn't 3 versus 2.5. This isn't 3 versus 3.5, right? Going the other way on like a dog situation. So if there wasn't such a thing as Survivor, I think this is a phenomenal teaser leg where you bump the Ravens down from 8 down under a field goal to 2. And that's kind of the only betting thing that I'm looking to get involved in with regards to this matchup, because it's a lot of points, and maybe if Minshew plays, the line goes up, and then that gets a little bit scary for backdoor potential. So I don't really want to do that either, and I don't want to bet the Ravens now at -8. And again, if Anthony Richardson plays, I'm like, oh well, listen, the Colts are semi-live here, but from a strategic standpoint in Survivor, like the Ravens are the correct play based on what I want to do going beyond this as far as saving teams for these other weeks that I think are going to be more critical.
I got you. Ravens as the survivor pick this week, folks. And yes, I will lay the points with the Ravens offense at -8. We continue to move on with the Titans at the Browns. Browns at home, favored by 3 points. And gotta say, I like picking my frisky teams early that I like when they're underdogs. And the Titans are one of those teams early. Again, they find themselves as 3-point dogs. I don't know what I really saw from the Browns to make them. I'm pretty sure they were 3.5-point favorites yesterday, if I'm not mistaken.
No, 2.5 on Monday night. Oh, you mean this game? My mistakes. Yes.
This game. Yeah. For this game. Yeah. For this game, I'm pretty sure they were 3.5-point favorites. So the line's already moved towards the Titans. But either way, I like how this we like Vrabel. I like betting on well-coached teams. I can't really say that I feel like the Browns are a well-coached team. Deshaun Watson is not looking that good that early. We talked about it earlier. If Saquon Barkley is one of the running backs that does actually matter, is Nick Chubb another running back that actually matters? I'd probably say so. So he's out of the picture and will be for the foreseeable future, of course. Meanwhile, on the flip side, Tannehill, he does enough, man. He does enough. Hopkins and him, it looks like as they get more reps, maybe there's something there if they can stay healthy for the whole season, but they don't have to stay healthy for the whole season. We're just talking about week 3 right now. And as long as we're here in week 3, give me the points. I will take the Titans as road dogs +3 in Cleveland on a short week.
Yeah. So, okay. First of all, the Browns rating that would have made them pick them at home against the Bengals in week 1 and a 2.5-point favorite in Pittsburgh in week 2 on Monday night. That rating, based on a pretty accurate sort of market rating for the Titans, would make the Browns 5 here, -5. Okay. And so I also just happen to disagree with that rating, even if Nick Chubb was available. So my rating for the Browns goes, is considerably lower. If the market sort of has them as a 60 out of 100 or 59 out of 100, I have the Browns as sort of just barely above average at 53 out of 100. That rating would kind of crank out to a 3.5, which is where we were, as you mentioned. In fact, it was actually available at 4. And so I actually grabbed some Tennessee 4 earlier on in the week, but we are now headed to 3. We're at -3 with, basically even money in a lot of places. And I think that's going to inspire me to bet back on the Browns at -3 at even money, because for me, that creates a sort of synthetic point spread of Browns -2.5, because I win on 3. Right. Yeah. If my -3 bet pushes, I win on my +4 bet from earlier on in the week. And so if this line was 2.5, I would just tell you, okay, bet the Browns. But it's 3, so I can understand. We're all, you made a ton of really good points there as far as the coaching stuff is concerned, and and the miscreant back there for the Browns, just being super grabby out on the field with regards to people's face masks, and
I'm just gonna let that one go.
Just a grabby guy. Yeah, listen, he gets away with a lot of stuff. What do you want me to say? So the problem is yes, Nick Chubb matters, but man, our guy Ford was out there doing work too. And so when you see that type of thing, and then presumably Kareem Hunt, imagine he'll get sort of 5 to 10 carries this weekend. Between the two of them, I think they can both, fill that role quite a bit. And so, I think the Browns defense is still pretty legit. And we'll talk about this a little bit more with regards when we get to the Steelers game. But I told you last week, I love the Steelers. I, was in sicko mode, dreaming about them, taking them in Survivor, all of that kind of thing. And then you watch the game, they get their early touchdown defensively. And luckily they got the late touchdown defensively again, because I don't know that the Steelers, if given another 3 quarters, were going to score a touchdown, and actually execute a drive, which again will come in handy later on in this conversation. And so part of me just goes man, maybe I'm underrating the Browns here, because this defense is pretty legit. And yeah, you mentioned the Titans, and there's a certain degree of how much credit do we give the Titans versus how much blame do we give the Chargers for that game, because I know I was backing the Titans like a little bit because of the Titans, but a lot of it because of the Chargers, and being like, yeah, I don't really, it's the right. It's the Chargers. So it's like, you can't beat up on the Chargers and then also like big up the Titans, right? Like there has to sort of, that pie sort of has to be relatively equal, or at least sort of equal, add up to 100. And so I just kind of go like, man, this does kind of feel like one of those grimy, disgusting Browns, like 16-9 type of wins, where it's like, yeah, man, they had 30 carries from 2 guys. Amari Cooper was out there balling. Like, how much do you really want out of, Deshaun Watson, or how much are you actually going to be able to get? How much do you need? And the answer is honestly probably not that much. And yeah, I'm just not psyched about the Titans offense. Like, that was another one where it's like, man, if we could just get out of here with a win, like that would feel a little bit like stealing. So if I felt a little bit like stealing getting a win from the Titans last week, and I felt a little bit like stealing getting a win against the Browns, really starts to add up to like, man, I think you kind of like the Browns here. And so to me, again, a little bit different because I can get a synthetic -2.5 here. But, I can't tell you I like them +3 if I like them -2.5, right? So give me the Browns in this game.
Oh, I got you. I need to see a little more from the Browns here. This is another thing where at certain points of the season, I will jump on board a team and just ride them for a little bit. Just, give them a couple weeks of riding them, and I'm riding the Titans right now. So I'm there for at least another week. We switch it up here to the Buffalo Bills, 6.5-point favorites on the road in Washington. The Bills got their bounce back game last week against the Raiders, but the Raiders are not good, right? Jimmy G is Jimmy G, and I will always stand by that. That was my hate relationship with watching Jimmy G play football. And I put myself in a position where I was relying on Jimmy G when I don't need to anymore, because he's not on my team anymore. So why would I put myself through that?
Right.
Anyways, I'll put that aside. I'll put my personal feelings aside. But anyways, now the Buffalo Bills are laying 6.5 points in Washington, and I wonder if that's a little too many points. I'm going to take the points with the Commanders as home dogs. I still think Buffalo's a little shaky. I feel like a lot of that was more so on the Raiders last week, as opposed to Buffalo magically solving all of their problems again. And Washington so far has been able to move the ball on offense. Can they keep up with Buffalo? I don't know, but they don't have to keep up to win the game. They just got to cover 6.5 points. And I'll take that with the home dogs, Washington Commanders, +6.5.
Yeah, and we've dug into this before, and we'll do it again, so we don't need to harp on it. But like, Sam Howell is just a very interesting case study as far as like his college career and like where he ended up getting drafted, and now him getting sort of falling into this position where he's, it was kind of like, well, we don't really have anybody else. Let's try Sam Howell, and Ron Rivera not even realizing he was on the team, or that he was any good. I think the Commanders are good, man. I think the Commanders can dominate the line of scrimmage defensively in this game, and they can get Josh Allen doing kind of the dumb Josh Allen type stuff, right? And like, whether it's Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Trevor Lawrence, like these guys are just, we always talk about it, right? They get a little loose with the football, and that creates kind of high variance results. And because when they don't get loose with the football, they'll beat you by 4 touchdowns like they did last week. We talked about, like, I kind of think this game's either Raiders win or Bills win by 1,000,000. And if you want to, outline the Bills -21, like, feel free to do it. I think the Commanders win this game. I think they're good, man. I think they are. And like, yeah, I'm going to wait. I haven't bet it yet. I'm going to wait to see if we can get, like, if this touches 7, maybe like a 7 -115. Like, God, I'd probably even just panic and do a -120 at some point with the Commanders +7. But I also going to have them on the money line. I know that's sort of weird to say. Like, why do you care so much about whether you get 7 if you also have them on the money line? You think they're going to win the game outright? Because that's just good betting. Right? It's just good betting, just in case I'm wrong about the money line and this ends up being a 7-point, Bills win. But yeah, I think good vibes on the Commanders right now. Like, obviously going and getting that win, comeback win of their own in Denver. And I think the home field is starting to cook a little bit here with the new ownership, and they're 2-0 and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's good vibes around the team. The quarterback is making plays. The throw and catch to Terry McLaurin last week, like, I don't normally like audibly yelp when something happens in sports anymore and dead inside. But man, I hooted when that catch got made by McLaurin. That throw was a dime, and that catch was sweet. He's got weapons. They've got a good defense. Like, there's a lot to like about the Commanders, and like we said before the season, I think they're the best team in the NFC South. Unfortunately, they just don't play in the NFC South, which is
that took me a second there. I was
yeah,
like, oh, wait,
which is a problem.
I get it. I got you.
Because the Cowboys are a wagon, and the Eagles are, have been wagon-ish, and like could be a wagon again this year, and that's going to be a problem for the Commanders. But yeah, I think they're better than a lot of teams in the NFC. They might be the fourth best team in the NFC, actually. Not that I've been really counting that up, but
I like it. Washington plus 6.5 home dogs. Let's go. Texans at the Jags. Jags at home laying 9.5 points. That is a massive, massive number. The Jags offense hasn't looked great, we'll say, and I know they played the Chiefs defense. You talked about it last week. The Chiefs defense doesn't get as much credit because we're not used to giving the Chiefs defense credit, but they did a pretty solid job against the Jags last week. Now I'm asking the Jags to lay 9.5 points against the Texans, and I know aren't a really good team, but I feel like these divisional games at times end up being a lot closer than we may remember them being. I'm going to need you to remind me about that here, but 9.5 points just seems like a lot to me here. The Texans, again, they haven't looked good. I'm rolling here more so with the divisional game and them being able to keep it within striking distance. An ugly cover here for the Texans at 9.5.
So if you're interested in things like, okay, what are people betting over the course of the week, and you're not just showing up on Sunday going like, okay, what's the point spread? And like you say, right? Like, where was it? How did it get here? It's and all that kind of thing. This hit 10 on Wednesday morning for maybe an hour before others hopped on the Texans at plus 10. Okay. And I was going to say to you, like, let's switch that graphic out and give yourself the plus 10. And then I went and looked, and it's pretty much 9.5 across the board. So like, that's how long it lasted. Like, it was 9.5 yesterday. It's 9.5 today. But as of Wednesday morning, it was like 10. So I grabbed the 10, pretty thrilled about that. Feel really good about it. I don't really know why just yet. In fact, that's kind of my next order of business. Like, sometimes you just grab a number and then you kind of retrofit a case for it, which I don't like it. I know that sort of sound, when I say it that way, it makes it sound like, wait, what? You're making picks and then you're making a case for it. It's really more like I'm starting from a point of not liking what I've seen from the Jags this season, right? Like, total aside here, I had a 50-1 bet on, I had a $50 bet on 14-1 that the Panthers were going to be the lowest scoring team of the week this past week. And if you'll remember, they had 6 points going through 3 quarters. And so when you have a game like that at the end of the week, you go, okay, well, like, what's the low scoring team that I have to stay under, right? Because if the lowest scoring team is 17, that's awesome. You're cooking with gas. Problem is, the stupid Jags scored 9 points at home against the Chiefs. And so I had to hope that the Panthers stayed under 9 points. Like, that didn't give me much wiggle room, right? But so the point is like, the Jags can't score more than 9 points at home. Like, I know the Chiefs defense is much improved, and listen, they might be a real, shocking report. The Chiefs might be a wagon as well this year, but like, man, 9 points.
And they had chances. They had red zone chances.
Right. And it's just like, we had, for whatever reason, I guess it's because of the streak that the Jags went on to make the playoffs and the comeback that, again, how much credit are you giving to the Jags for the comeback against the Chargers, and how much discredit are you giving to the Chargers for that comeback? But like, we got all caught up in Trevor Lawrence being sort of the potential of Trevor Lawrence, and that like, he can't, he's not going to be a guy to turn the ball over in the same way. It's like, you know what? He might be Josh Allen. He might be Lamar Jackson, like super good potential quarterbacks who just turn the ball over too much and create wide sort of, variations of a potential score here. Right. And again, maybe it's because the Houston Texans walked in there last year and ran the football down the Jags' throats with Dameon Pierce and somehow came out of there with a win. I kind of think the Texans are going to win again this week. And that has steered me away from the Jags as a survivor pick. I just think there's some bad stuff kind of brewing there with the Jags. They're off to England for 2 straight weeks next week. Like, that seems like a really bad time for that kind of thing. You know, if you're on that team, you're going, man, I got to go to London or what, you know, whatever. I got to go to England for 2 weeks. Like, you know, when do I pack? Like, what do I, you know, what are the what's the electronic, you know, thing that I got to deal with? Do I have my adapters all tightened up? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just feels like this is such like an afterthought game for them. If I was on the team, I'd be like, man, England, like next week, brutal. It's like, oh yeah, we got to play the Texans, by the way, halfway through. Now, like, we're going to need a way better injury report from the Texans. We're going to need the safeties to be healthy. We're going to need some more offensive linemen in the mix here. So, like, that might be sort of the retrofitting of that, being like, okay, this team might be sort of better than what we've seen over the first 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. But as for the Jags are concerned, man, like, they probably should have lost to the Colts in week 1, and they scored 9 points in week 2. And I don't care who they were playing in week 2. And yeah, okay, I guess only giving up 17 against the Chiefs is impressive, but you know, I like DeMeco Ryans, your old San Francisco defensive coordinator. Like, I don't think that team's giving up necessarily. So, yeah, man, just kind of a weird feeling potentially about the Texans. But at +10, I certainly was happy to grab that number for the like hour long that it was available this morning.
Yes, I think I was also looking to just grab some points somewhere this week on my full slate. No, I'm joking. It's just the divisional games. That's the biggest thing for me too. When I see such big spreads, it's always like, come on now, what are we doing here? I see what you're trying to do to me here, Vegas. I see you. Mm-hmm. Panthers at the Seahawks. Seahawks at home, laying 6 points, and as I mentioned, another instance here. I'm on the Seahawks, laying the 6 points, but this is. I look for instances where I talk myself into, you know, I looked at the overall slate. I came in, start this podcast saying I'm on a lot of favorites, but then I look at a game like this and I'm like, how am I supposed to take the Panthers? What did I see from the Panthers on Monday night that shows me that I would feel comfortable watching this game in the fourth quarter and being like, you know what? I need Bryce Young to do something for me right now to cover this spread. I just can't do it. There were videos of my guy lining up in shotgun beside the guard or behind the guard, not the center, the guard, and his running back having to nudge him over so that he lined up behind the center. I know that's a snapshot, but it's a snapshot of just the confidence level that I would have in this offense to do anything. They should have gotten blown out on Monday night. And now on a short week, you're going against the Seahawks, which if we know one thing about the Seahawks, they can put points up on the board. I don't know how many points the Panthers can score in this game. I really don't. But the Seahawks, I feel like they can put up points. So I don't like laying the 6 points because I don't like laying so many points. But I just can't do anything with the Panthers. So I'm laying 6 points with the Seahawks here.
Yeah. And listen, like, have Seahawks games gone particularly well this season? No. But, you know, it's one of those teams that we thought we were like, oh, I guess they stink. And then all of a sudden, like, they were just good again, despite having 2 tackles, you know, 2 offensive tackles being out of commission last week. And they just go on the road and win outright. And you're like, oh, yeah, like, bounce back. Like, don't just judge the book by one chapter, if you will. And so I bet Seattle -4.5. That was available as recently as yesterday. That did not seem to make any sense. Nope. I'm not even sure if -6 makes even a ton of sense. So, but you know, I'm obviously not going to talk you out of it. I did get, like I said, a little bit better number. We have seen some, you know, some buyback when it gets to 6 to get it back down to 5.5. So you probably are able to get a 5.5 between now and Sunday. But yeah, I'm with you, right? And when it comes to Bryce Young, right, it's going to get easier. Might take a while because the infrastructure, as we talked about, isn't there. Don't love the coach. Don't love the roster. That anecdote that you gave is like the type of thing that's going to happen when things aren't second nature to you just yet, right? And things are not second nature to rookie quarterbacks. And like, do you have a backup plan? Because Anthony Richardson's backup plan is, well, we're going to run, Shane Steichen is going to draw up a bunch of running plays for you where you're going to get into the game and get positive in that type of way. Bryce Young's best play was when he absolutely left Marcus May in the middle of the field, breaking that dude's ankles on the one scramble that he has. But unfortunately for Bryce Young, he's like a tiny dude who like you can't have running around all that often. When he does, it's effective because it's so rare, because it has to be rare. And so there isn't a type of thing where it's like, well, let's just run a quarterback's power sweep to get some yardage. It's like, no, man, we're going to get this guy killed. That's why they have Andy Dalton coming in for short yardage quarterback sneak type stuff, because Bryce Young, again, is just a little dude. So he might end up being awesome. I think there's actually a decent chance of that, right? But like the infrastructure has to be there, the talent around him has to be there, and things have to be second nature for him before they can start succeeding. And honestly, defensively, they looked good at times for a lot of that game. But again, if we're bummed out about Dennis Allen and Derek Carr, which like we just kind of always exist to be, then like how much of that is like the Panthers defense and how much of that is just being like super lame offense from the Saints, who honestly felt like they could just run Taysom Hill every time and get 10 yards, but like for whatever reason, like didn't do that every time. The reason for that is because they're back to a scenario where their quarterback is just good enough or thought highly enough or veteran enough that they have to keep putting him out there for like a 95% snap rate, even though the best successful, most successful plays probably involved Taysom Hill. So yeah, again, it's less about the Panthers and more about the Saints necessarily on how they were sort of able to keep that team to 20 points or so. So yeah, I'm on the Seahawks here.
All right, yeah, we're both on the Seahawks. I like that -6. The laying points continues on with the Bears at the Chiefs. The Chiefs are at home laying 12.5 points. And this is another instance where it's a lot of points. Normally, I say when it's a double-digit spread, I need you to talk me out of taking the points. But much like I just said about our last game, there's not much that I see that makes me want to rely on Justin Fields and the Bears. And I know that they don't have to do much. They just got to keep it kind of close in terms of it being 12.5. Yeah. But I need a good old-fashioned Chiefs game where Mahomes throws for like 300 yards and we get talked into Kadarius, like their receivers being fine. Sky Moore's fine. Kadarius Toney's fine. Like everything's just great, even though we know that's not the case. But you know what I mean? One of those games that throw us off the scent. And I feel like the Bears might just be primed to be that squad. I don't like laying all these points. I've said this multiple times this pod. But surprise, surprise, I'm laying a lot of points with the Chiefs.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it. But I'm not dying to bet the Bears either. I don't think this is some like value-based proposition on the Bears. To be honest with you, I kind of thought we might get to 14, at which point I would bet the Bears. I'd bet the Bears at 14. That's the number I would bet. Okay. And there was 13s, it's kind of open around 13, but nobody has any chill. So whoever liked the Bears had to go ahead and bet the Bears plus 13 because, again, like we can't just all sit around and wait for it to go to 14, then bet it at 14 and just like have a better bet. Somebody always has to go and ruin it for everybody else. Now, I don't know if maybe that's saving me from getting beat on the Bears here, but I think the key here to watch for, and this might be more of a live betting type situation, is Justin Fields going to run the football? Because Justin Fields is not running the football, and the key to Justin Fields is running the football. And so, like, what? You know what I mean? Like, what? Like, if the key to a guy being good is the thing that he does best, and you're not going to do the thing that he does best, like, I got a problem with that. But it also creates potentially some value here because the Bears start to plummet in their rating, right? If the Bears keep plummeting in their rating, that's based on them losing, obviously. But if they're losing the way that they are because Justin Fields isn't running, but it's not because Justin Fields is like missing a leg, like Justin Fields could start running at any time. In fact, we saw that last year. Now, again, as we talked about before, once he started running, they didn't actually win any football games outside of, what the upset, I guess, against the Patriots. It just looked better, right? It just like games are closer. They were more interesting. Yeah. He was a fantasy football darling, et cetera, et cetera. So like that switch could get flipped at any time, I guess, is the sort of like be prepared for that switch to get flipped. Now, is it against the Chiefs where you want to flip that switch, or do you want to just kind of keep trying out what you're going to try out here, knowing that you've got something of a winnable game against Denver at home next week, where like that might be the time to sort of let him loose again? I don't know why he hasn't been running. I want to give credit to like the defenses and sort of, we picked I was on the Buccaneers last week because of the idea that their linebackers, their veteran linebackers, and their game plan is going to be spy on Justin Fields, keep him in the pocket, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know whether they actually did that other than looking at the box score to see that he ran 3 times for like 4 yards, right? So that was either because of the Bucs defense or because the Bears just refused to do it. So again, point is, if they flip the switch here and he starts running, then they can keep this game reasonable. And when I say reasonable, I talk about like a 24-14, 27-17 type deal here. But we got to see that before we sort of make that bet that it's going to happen.
Yeah. Nope, totally makes a whole lot of sense there. And I think we're in a scenario here with Justin Fields where you're now in the matrix of the couch potato quarterbacks that are screenshotting things to make it even worse. And so, do you know what I mean? As bad as it is, I'm just saying it looks 10 times worse because someone could take a screenshot and be like, hey, look, that guy's wide open. What are you looking at? You know, when like, what does that really mean?
Dan Orlovsky did a really nice job on ESPN this week, and he broke down a couple of different plays where it was like he sees a guy wide open, he's just not throwing it, and then other instances where he's just staying on the wrong side of the field. And so there's a couple of different issues there, but none of them have to do with him running per se, right? Which to me is the fundamental issue on whether they can kind of keep drives together, they can put up some field goals when they were normally punting, or maybe turn some field goals into touchdowns.
And shouts to Dan Orlovsky because, like, hey, my beef is not with hey, here's a full breakdown as to what's wrong with Justin Fields. Sure. Mine is, the picture that gets taken and shared on social media as if, like, you can't take a picture of anything for a split second frame and be like, hey, look how wide open this guy is, right? So, anyways, bottom line, I'm on the Chiefs minus 12.5. Look for that number to continue climbing as we get closer to Sunday's action. Speaking of big lines, we got the Cowboys laying 12 points on the road in Arizona. Even as I look at this and my pick of Dallas laying the 12 points, I don't even like myself laying the 12 points on the road. But I had to talk myself into the fact that Dallas might just be real. Like super real. And where the Cards have been spicy through 2 weeks, it's been a cute story because it's like, hey, they're not as bad as we thought they were. Dallas, as I like to say, is a different weight class than anything that the Cards have seen so far. This is a big boy spread. Again, I don't like laying the points. Hey, I've said this before on this pod. But I'm laying 12 points here with the Cards, with the Dallas Cowboys, pardon me. And I'm interested to hear your take on this, kind sir.
Well, so it's interesting, right? Like, and I don't usually reference like this summer point spreads, right? Like that are sort of projected throughout the entire season, because obviously like things change. But I think the interesting thing here is like what has changed. And so in the summer, Dallas at Arizona, week 3, Dallas was 6.5 point favorites.
Ooh.
In the summer, we thought Arizona was going to be the worst team in the league.
Interesting.
And now, what can you say about Arizona? And it's like, oh, they're probably the worst team in the league, but like maybe they're not, right? And so the point is like we still have to look. We haven't downgraded Arizona,
no,
right? Because we already had them super far down. Like you can only get so much lower than like already at the worst team in the league with a 4 win total, and we are 5.5 points, 6 points clear of that number, which is entirely based on the Cowboys going up because the Cardinals, like I said, their rating is stabilized as garbage. And if anything, by the way, like the Cardinals rating has gone up because they've covered in 2 games, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. So like we're just assuming they're stayed put as a crappy team instead of like getting, sort of an improved look, so to speak. So all that is to say, like I bet the Cardinals, just a regular bet, nothing insane, when it was 13 earlier on in the week. So like this has come down from 13 to 14, or 13 to 12, I should say. And I know I just railed on people for having no chill and betting the Bears plus 13 instead of waiting to see if it would go to 14.
Yeah.
So that tells you where sort of I think of this, right? Where I was like, I don't think there was any chance this was going to 14 for a road favorite, and I realized the Cowboys will probably have more fans in the stands in Arizona. Like that's kind of been a thing over, basically NFL history. So, I'm content with just taking that Arizona plus 13. I don't think they're going to win the game necessarily, but I think that the excitement about the Cowboys, and listen, I'm on again, I am pro Cowboys this season. This is not an anti-Cowboys thing. I promise you. I make quite a bit of money if they are successful this season to a championship. I just think this is, I mean, listen, 13 was too many points, as evidenced by the fact that it's 12 now. I think 12 is still too many points. I would sort of be interested in the Cardinals to like 11, plus 11 still kind of works for me, and like a 21-10, 31-20 type football game.
No, I got you.
By the way, I think Josh Dobbs will get better every week. I think he got better from week 1 to week 2, which is why we were interested in the Cardinals, thought they could win outright. I think a 20-point lead, 21-point lead was indicative that we weren't necessarily wrong. It's just
shouts to the early cash out. Got to give a shout out to the early
mega shouts to the early cash out for all the people who know what we're talking about. Yes. Which I would love to expound upon further, but I think I would get tased if
I understand. As I said earlier in the pod, real ones know, right? The real ones know. And we'll just leave it there. Sunday Night Football. As we switch gears here, Sunday Night Football, we got the Steelers at the Raiders. Raiders at home as 2.5-point favorites. I am leaning on the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road here. There's very little from the Raiders that I've seen that has me taking them to lay points against anyone. And the Steelers defense, meet Jimmy G. Jimmy G, meet the Steelers defense. I feel like Jimmy G will be seeing a lot of your man's TJ Watt during this game on Sunday night. And if there's a QB that's loose with the football, it's Jimmy G. So for that reason, don't have to talk me into taking the Pittsburgh Steelers too much here. I get it. The Raiders are at home. I understand all that. Primetime game. I know that the Steelers offense is not that good, but this is a bet on the Steelers defense versus Jimmy G. Give me those points.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with you conceptually because we just watched the Steelers defense basically single-handedly win a game. But again, I'm watching that game going like, man, if we can just get out of this, like with the Steelers win, I promise I'll never bet on the Steelers again, right? It's like one of those type of deals. It's just like, please, like I've made a huge mistake backing the Steelers. Just something happened. And then of course the ball comes loose and TJ Watt's like scooping it up and running it back and, looking like a tailback out on the open field.
He's doing the prime time, the coach prime.
And then he hits you at the prime. So my first inclination was, okay, I don't want anything to do with the Steelers this week. Short week, Sunday Night Football in Las Vegas. And you can, obviously you have the Jimmy G scar tissue and all of that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But this line opened +1, Raiders +1.
Ooh.
And I was delighted to bet on the Raiders.
Ooh.
In that instance.
Okay.
And that's easy to say because if the number was still +1, like how good would I feel about it? Like obviously the fact that this has moved to Raiders -2.5 from Raiders +1 in the 2 days, day and a half since is indicative that like, yeah, it was a really good bet. And is this going to close 3? Like, what's the contest line going to be? Like, do I want to lay points with the Raiders, even though it is still under a field goal? All of those questions are sort of theoretically good. I'll just sit here with my +1 on the Raiders and be like pretty content with it, except I do really like the Raiders in this spot because the Steelers offense, again, like has not shown me anything. At least the Raiders have stuff. Right? Like Josh Jacobs could actually have a breakout game here at some point, right? And again, it's not like the Steelers run defense was particularly good because they wiped out Nick Chubb and then another random dude out of Cincinnati Bearcat, just runs out on the field and like he goes for 100 yards, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, yeah, okay, Josh Jacobs could do that. And like Devontae Adams and all, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, I just think like the Steelers offense and like we know, and it's not like, oh, what's wrong with the Steelers offense? Like, this is weird. Like they're booing Matt Canada, the offensive coordinator, like off the field because this has been like a pervasive thing for 3 years with this Steelers offense. Their running back, Najee Harris, is not good, right? Deontay Johnson, like I don't know if is he out again this week. I'll have to double check that. But honestly, I'm not sure I care because outside of like, it's like the Jets offense with Zach Wilson. Like, unless you're getting a George Pickens, like 70-yard touchdown splurge, like the rest of it just kind of isn't happening. Yeah. And so like, I do trust Jimmy G more than I trust the miscreant on the Browns because like, I don't think he's going to get strip sacked the way that guy did. did, right? And honestly, it wasn't really necessarily Watson's fault that first interception happened, right? Pops out of the guy's hands, ends up right in another guy's hands, right, et cetera, right? So that was kind of bad luck from like a getting 7 point standpoint. For them, great luck for us on the Steelers, but like, I love the Steelers when it's like rally around Mike Tomlin, right? Like we talked about the Dan Campbell thing. I don't like the Steelers when it's like we just won on Monday night, which like they always do. And then now we go on the road against a team that got blown out last week. Like the Raiders still have some pride. They have a victory this season. Like they might not be that bad. Whereas like the Steelers, honestly, like as much as I thought highly of them coming into this season, like there's nothing they've shown me has been like, oh, this team like is exactly who I thought they were going to be. They've just been disappointing essentially all season long. So thrilled to have the Raiders +1 and would play the Raiders at -2.5 if chosen. I don't want anything to do with the Steelers in this game.
Okay. I'm gonna be honest with you, and I will admit my emotions towards Jimmy G. I will admit it. I'm gonna admit it. I'm being honest here. And if we can be something here on this pod, let it be honest. So I'm on the Steelers +2.5 in this game, right? I'm being honest here. Being honest. Moving forward here, we got the Eagles. Monday night, we got 2 Monday night games yet again. And we got the Eagles laying 5 points on the road in Tampa Bay. This one, okay. The Bucs have looked all right so far, but it's not like they've played anyone that spectacular. But they've surpassed our expectations, right? I'm leaning on taking the Bucs as the home dogs and the +5 points here, but I got to be honest, I don't really like it. The Eagles offense hasn't looked the same as it has in years past, but still, as mentioned last week, they were up big against the Vikings. And now you're talking about Thursday night to Monday night. That's a lot of rest here. I can easily be talked into switching this pick here into the Eagles, but the principles of the home dog, this is where I'm reminding myself here, where I feel like normally people are going to jump on the Eagles, hammer the Eagles, where the Bucs defense is sitting there like, hey, we're still here. We're still pretty good. It's not going to be easy pickings for the Eagles offense that has looked all right. But I'm not forgetting the arguments going on the sidelines. I'm not forgetting that in a game that they were winning.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to take the points with the Bucs. I don't really like it, though. I'm being honest with you.
No. Okay. I'm with you. I think the Buccaneers can win this game. I think it is worth mentioning when this reopened, at 6.5. This is another one where nobody had any chill, and people were grabbing that 6.5, ripping it down to 6. Now it's like, well, maybe it'll go back to 6.5. No, went like directly to 5, basically, like with 5.5, 5. And so, and then there's been some sort of little bit back and forth. Like there might be some 6s available out there. At this point, I'm pretty much just waiting for 6. And of course that means waiting until Monday night, because obviously we have that extra day. Yeah, man, I'm with you. I think the Jalen Hurts, like, I shouldn't say everybody because we'll see, but the whole like running the football plan with Jalen Hurts, like, these teams have had an off season to realize that there's a lot more mobile quarterbacks than there used to be. There's a lot more mobile quarterbacks than there are non-mobile quarterbacks, or at least sort of that's kind of how it feels like, right? So your defense has to kind of be like prevent the running quarterback, as kind of a top priority, where it didn't used to be the case. And you kind of used to like be like, okay, well, let's just kind of make sure we keep him in the pocket. Now you got to be ready for like actual like runs and keepers and all of that kind of stuff. And I think the Buccaneers defense, while they haven't necessarily had to deal with that, I mean, we talked about the idea that like maybe that they were dissuading Justin Fields from running, or maybe the Bears were self-dissuading. I don't really know. But like, at least they faced a guy who's explosive from, a running standpoint last week.
Yeah.
And then outside of just throwing deep ball after deep ball and kind of hoping for the best, I'm not loving necessarily what I'm seeing out of Jalen Hurts from a throwing perspective, right? And like,
Agreed.
they got that 20-point lead. And like, yes, also the coach doesn't seem to understand when you're supposed to go for 2, which means like a wacky, wonky number like 5 becomes important. Right. And so like this
that
number
was the most frustrating thing last week.
It was baffling. The whole thing was baffling. And so the market ratings based on point spreads, obviously, that have happened because the Eagles were brought down the way that they were from a rating standpoint because of the injuries, then yeah, like this number is 5.3 basically from a market standpoint. So you can see why people just on that alone would be interested in the Buccaneers plus 6.5. My ratings that are, I think pretty much in lockstep. I mean, I probably have the Eagles rated a little bit higher necessarily in the market, but I have the Buccaneers rated even higher than sort of like way higher, I should say, than the market. So my numbers come out to 4.2 for the Bucks, right? So like directionally, I'm still interested in the Buccaneers. Home underdog, again, an Eagles team that I think I'm going to be fading probably a fair amount here, especially giving points on the road or giving more than a touchdown at home. Kind of think the Buccaneers have a chance to win this game too. And I'll be on the Bucks on the spread and the money line.
Oof, I like it. I like it. You made me feel a lot more comfortable with this pick here. And I like that. I like that side of the pot. I like when we see things the same way. We'll wrap things up with one more Monday Night Football game, and that being the Rams at the Bengals. Cincinnati, 2.5-point favorites at home. The Rams, they looked good. They stuck with San Francisco, who many believe are one of the top teams in the league. The Rams, I mean, they held serve for the majority of that game. It was a weird one at the end with the weird backdoor cover, kicking a field goal down 10 with no time left on the clock. I get all that. But we're moving on to this week. And I got to say, this isn't really about the Rams for me. I'm on the Bengals laying the 2.5 points. And I'm going to be honest, this is just a show me game. Like if you're the Bengals and you, Joe Burrow, are supposed to be who you're supposed to be, you can't be 0-3. And I think that you got to show up in this game, Monday Night Football at home against a Rams team that's pretty good, but you got to get up for that game. At 0-2, you got to get up for that game. This is more of a show me pick in terms of picking the Rams here, because if they don't, in terms of picking the Bengals, pardon me, because if the Bengals don't do it now, I don't know what this season is. Down 0-3 in the tough AFC. Oof, it's going to be a big fight the whole way. So give me the Bengals laying the 2.5 points.
Well, and you said it right, with show me or show up, and the answer and the question is Joe Burrow going to play in this game? Because this line opened 6.5 on Sunday night without the sort of understanding that Joe Burrow is going, whether he's going to play or not.
Okay.
And to me, this is a line indicating that Joe Burrow is not going to play, or at least it certainly does not look like Joe Burrow is going to play. Because, put it this way, right? Like from a market rating standpoint, right? The same betting market that made the Bengals 3-point favorites against the Ravens at home, right? I mean, just look at it like that way, right?
Yeah.
3 against the Ravens, 2.5 against the Rams suggests that the Rams are better than the Ravens. Well, no, right? Like, obviously not, which means the Bengals have to come down. But that market that suggests that, okay, full squad Bengals team against the Ravens last week, like what would the number be in this game? I have it closer to 8.
Interesting.
Okay. Right. And if you downgrade the Bengals because they have lost both games, then, okay, that's where you get sort of a 6.5. That's where it opened. And again, I tripped and stumbled around and didn't take it because, again, I was like, well, maybe we'll get 7, not knowing that the Burrow injury was as bad as it seems like as it is, to literally wake up the next morning and be like, oh, it's 2. Now, my next move was, all right, where is the Joe Burrow is out for a week or 2 with the calf injury tweet? Like, where is the Schefter, when you see like 5 different organizations send the same tweet in 5 seconds, like, where is that? Like, that hasn't come yet. So you could be betting the Bengals right now at -2, and then Joe Burrow plays, at which point the line's going to go back up, maybe not to 6.5 necessarily, but like a 3.5 or a 4, something along those lines. So that's a good reason to bet the Bengals. The other good reason to bet the Bengals is our favorite little game here. What happens when a quarterback is, starting quarterback is out? Where do you put that line? Like, what has to happen for this line to be where it is? And so this is a line of a Bengals team that is a 50 out of 100. Are the Bengals a 50 out of? Are they a flat average team with Jake Browning, who is the backup quarterback, by the way, for those of you who didn't know, with Jake Browning in the lineup against the Rams? Are they an average team? Because that's what this line indicates. Now, if Browning is in and Burrow is out, maybe the rating goes down even further, putting them into the below average category. at which point the line goes down below and you're getting a sort of a pick-em type situation with the Bengals. And honestly, I would be interested in the Bengals there too, because again, I rather bet on Jake Browning at a wildly depressed price than bet on the Rams on the assumption that the Bengals are just going to automatically be completely useless without Joe Burrow, right? They're obviously not going to be good necessarily with Joe Burrow, but an 0-2 team back against the wall, everybody else plays better, blah, 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 all those cliches. That's a team that I want to be betting on. I just know that right now it's kind of like I can bet it now and maybe Joe Burrow plays and I get a better number or like the number, I'm getting a better number now than I would be when it's announced that he plays. Or I'm getting a bad number when Jake Browning gets involved. And I think, but the 0-2 element matters here because it's not like they're 2-0 and they can sit Joe Burrow for a week to like
exactly
give him rest, right? So it's actually this really interesting game and they have the extra day. So it's not like you can sort of make these, you know, definitive plans or whatever by Thursday, Friday, or even Saturday, or honestly even Sunday, because the reality is it's probably going to be like a game time decision type of situation where like we'll see where he's at, because it just kind of has been a thing where it's like, yeah, he's not 100%, but blah, 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 blah. And like, yeah, is it costing them games? Maybe, but maybe he's still better than Jake Browning, even though he's kind of sort of half hobbling around out there. So really interesting game. Maybe it's wait. If Jake Browning is in and the line goes to pick him or better, you take the Bengals. Maybe it's wait. And if Joe Burrow is in, the line goes up over 3.5, up to 4, up to 4.5, maybe 6. Then it's take the Rams. So I think it's you can bet either side, but I would want the Bengals at a depressed number with Browning, and I would want the Rams at the sort of original or close to original number here. As a way better underdog than they are now. So kind of an impossible thing to do. I wouldn't disagree with you now because I think there's two ways that you win this bet on Cincinnati -2.5 right now, right? With them still winning with Jake Browning as the quarterback or Burrow coming back playing and them winning. But I think from the best bet you can possibly make is wait until Monday to see what sort of shakes down with the quarterback position in the market.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think that, you know, if Joe Burrow, if I'm making the odds and I'm, you know, just basing this on the fact that the things that you mentioned that stand out to me the most, the Bengals being at 0-2, and if there's a chance that Burrow can play, he strikes me as a dude that's going to say, I'm playing. And they're just going to listen to him. And he's going to go out there and he might not be healthy, right? He might not be 100%, but he knows the importance of not going 0-3 in that division and in that conference and what that will mean going forward. So, wow, lots to pay attention to there, lots to keep in touch with as we move forward, heading into the action, not only Thursday, but Sunday as well. And when all that news breaks and happens, my friend, where can the good people find you to get more of the information and education that we so crave?
Yeah, and this is a perfect example, right? Because I'm not going to have anything on this Rams-Bengals thing on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, but we will have an article on Monday morning about the 2 Monday Night Football games in the same way that we did last week. Over at The Score, you've got the app, fire up the betting section, the news, go into news on the far left side. There's a little bet tab. Everything that I write is over there. And obviously follow me on Twitter at mrusauthentic. And everything that I write gets retweeted through there as well. So Monday morning, we'll have both those Monday Night Football games, the best bets, and hopefully a better idea on what's going on with the Bengals quarterback situation. And that bet will be included, hopefully, again, assuming some sort of knowledge between now and then, that bet will be included in that article.
Yeah, hopefully the people listening to this are checking out all the info because there's lots of winners being handed out there, whether it's prop bets, whether it's a round robin moneyline parlay, lots going on there as always. And if you listen to this whole pod, thank you as well. Make sure you follow along. I'm on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander, on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Check out, there's a Clutch Picks Pod accounts both on Twitter and on Instagram as well. Follow along there for clips and, you know, just picks throughout the week between the pod and between when the games start as well. Thank you for liking and subscribing to this new venture that is the Clutch Picks podcast because we appreciate it. Again, the record's been all right so far, and the goal is to try to keep that train moving. So thank you to those who have been along for the ride as well. And as I always say, my name is Sheldon Alexander, and I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Till next time, See ya.